And with that, I'm going to introduce Steve Sharpe, Senior Staff Attorney at National Consumer Law Center. As Bruce mentioned, Steve has been here before. We always love to have the FHA guru come on our webinars to talk to us about what's going on with FHA. And Steve does a really great job explaining things in a way that is so easy to understand. So with that, I'm going to hand it right over to Steve.
And if it's not easy to understand, you can feel free to ask questions in the middle of it. Like we said, feel free to fill the question Q&A during. I'll take some pauses, and we'll definitely do questions at the end. Let me pull up my slides. Okay. Here we are. It's always a pleasure to talk to you all. Thank you, NHRC, for making me a frequent flyer on this series. What you all do to help people preserve home ownership is so important. It is a tricky time now. We have a lot of policy changes. That's what we're going to walk through. Some updates, try to break things down. I think this is probably maybe the first step in understanding kind of where policy is shifting on FHA. So we'll try to hit some topics, but I do think you'll probably have questions. It's probably going to make more sense when you actually have cases. Feel free, if you're a housing counselor and you're working with someone and you have a question about FHA, please feel free to email me. My email is right there. I've talked to many of you on the call. Happy to do some quick clarification because sometimes it makes more sense when you're actually there with a client. And man, it is an important time to help these folks. It is a rough rental market out there, and people have equity, and it's an even rough housing market. So preserving home ownership when you can really helps people maintain wealth, keeps them out of a really tough situation renting, and just provides stability for home, for the family, for the neighborhood, for everybody. That's why you're doing what you're doing. All know why it's so important. It's just an honor to present to you all since you're doing that frontline work, and let me know if I can help. And maybe the way to do this is to walk through what has changed. Probably equally important, when things come into effect, and dive back into some of the things we have talked about before. But just a reminder, you'll see all that as we go. But first, so here's the agenda. First, we're going to talk about a quick update on VA loans. Not the topic for today, but there are some things coming online, or at least that are possibly coming online. So want to keep you all aware of that. Then we're going to do effective dates, which probably is the most important thing we're going to talk about. We are about to approach a transition from the COVID waterfall to the permanent waterfall. And those of you who are brand new, when we say waterfall, we mean that menu of options that servicers evaluate to see what they can do for borrowers. So that's the waterfall. And what we're going to see here in about 2 months is a shift from one to the other. And so understanding when that is and how that has changed is probably the most important thing that you will take away from this call. We're going to quickly touch on what is currently in place through September 30th. We're going to do a reminder about the payment supplement. We talked about the payment supplement in more depth on a previous webinar, but we're going to talk about it here again just as a reminder. And then we're going to spend some time on the upcoming waterfall. So being prepared for what is changing effective October 1st. That is right around the corner. It will come faster than you think. And so being ready and knowing what the new policies are in place, I think will help you be a better advocate and help for your clients. So that's what we're going to cover. We'll stop at each point to see if there's questions. Feel free to ask them during, and we can talk about it after, especially if there's something that I say that doesn't seem that doesn't quite make sense or you think needs a little more clarification, that's really what we're here to do. Okay, so let's get started. Like I said, not directly on topic, but really important, and there are some things changing. So we're going to first talk about VA guaranteed loans. And I didn't have it in the slides, but I have to say, every time, for those of you who have heard me do this presentation or presentations like this, know where I'm going to start, but maybe you haven't heard this. And so bear with me if you've already been there. We break these things down by investor. The most important step that you can take when you first get a client into the door is to identify who is the relevant investor for that loan, who is calling the shots and determining what loss mitigation policies apply. That is really step one. Why? Because you need to know what rules to look at. You need to understand what is available for this client based on their loan status. So that generally divides into the federal investors and the private or non-federal investors. The federal investors are FHA, VA, USDA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. When you have one of those loans, you look at the particular rules. So you don't apply FHA rules to a VA guaranteed loan or Fannie Mae rules to a USDA guaranteed loan. We have some webinars, I believe, through NHRC on how to do that. There are some pretty simple steps to take to make that determination. If you have questions about that, just send me an email. I can probably send you to some detail or some guidance on that particular question. But again, step one, who is calling the shots? Unfortunately, if you are in the bucket where it is a private, non-federally backed loan, it is harder to find out what the rules are that apply for those loans. That's just a challenge we face. The market generally breaks down where quite a large majority are in the federally backed boxes, but you will have some that are private, whether those are held in trust or held on the servicer's books. It's just harder to know what's available in that side. So we are going to talk then about two federal investors. The primary, the one that we're going to talk about today, is FHA and the changes that happen when you have an FHA insured loan. But now we're going to talk about VA. Wanted to do that aside just to make sure we're all on the same page that, you look at options per investor. I will do that every time I do one of these presentations, I think. So we got to start there. Okay, so now VA. And I think many of you know this story, but a little bit of background. So we had a program called the Veteran Affairs Servicing Purchase, or VASP. That was mandatory starting October 1st, 2024. The reason we had VASP is that there was approximately a 2-year period where VA guaranteed borrowers really lacked any sort of reasonable option for most folks when they fell behind to bring their loans current. This happened basically for two reasons. VA canceled a COVID-related partial claim program. If you don't know what partial claim is, we're going to talk about that soon. But they canceled what was set to be a temporary COVID-related program, and interest rates in the market skyrocketed. So because of those things that happened between around 2021, 2022, and VASP's mandatory date of October 1st, 2024, there were real bad options. And NPR, and you can see it in this link, covered that story in depth. It was so bad that there was a moratorium on VA foreclosures. I think many of you probably were dealing with borrowers in that period. And VASP was there to fill a gap that was created by this market condition. Story goes longer than that, but that's the short version. So we had VASP mandatory starting October 1st, 2024. VASP allowed for below market rate modifications. That's why it worked. We then had on October 3rd of 2025, VA telling NPR after a press release from that we had from the House Veterans Affairs Committee that they were canceling the VASP program, and they were canceling it effective May 1st, 2025, which was not a lot of time. And then we didn't even have details regarding that cancellation until this circular was released, 26-25-2, on April 23rd, 2025. So what had then happened was the circular provides details essentially for how to get into the queue to get VASP, which was really critical for borrowers who needed an option if they could get into the VASP queue. It was really important to do so. I know many of you worked on getting your borrowers into the queue for VASP. I know servicers were really outreaching as well, we heard, to try to get their borrowers in. And so many of you are probably still dealing with issues related to VASP, whether borrowers got in the queue or whether there's been any issue with modifications. If you are working on that and want any and just want to update me on it or get guidance, please feel free to email me. I'm very interested in what's happening with that bucket of folks. But certainly, given the May 1st, now that we're in July, there are a whole lot of people for various reasons who are not eligible for VASP. And unfortunately, they right now are sitting in this extremely challenging circumstance of rates are still high. The modification programs are generally just like not working very well for folks. We still don't have a partial claim, but this is the update, which I want to flag for you. We do have now a House bill, the VA Home Loan Program Reform Act, that has passed both the House and the Senate. Right now, it is waiting on signature from the president. I checked 15 minutes before I went on to this webinar to see if it has been signed into law yet. It has not. I haven't heard any suggestion that it won't be. I honestly just don't. I haven't heard either way, but I would hope that it is signed into law. But it has passed both the House and the Senate. This will establish a partial claim for VA loans. The key bullet is to stay tuned, because just because it is signed into law, it will still have to go through a process to get put into place as a program. I am not sure what that process is going to look like. We certainly hope that that process is fast, because right now, like I said, there are probably a very significant number, I believe in the tens of thousands of borrowers who are seriously delinquent on their loans. And some portion of that folks are not going to be eligible for VASP for who knows what reason, or just may be even if you defaulted after the May 1st deadline, that's a pretty clear one that you're not going to be eligible for VASP. So this program is going to be extremely important. It's going to work more like your standard partial claim of bringing the loan current. I don't think it's going to be used to reduce payments, but still that is better than the increases we have seen. So, two things. Definitely stay tuned. We will all be keeping an eye on when VA's program is up and running. So again, it's not just about being signed. It also has to be put into place by VA. That is one. Two, I think if you are representing veterans, let me know, especially those who are, if they are waiting on that program. We really at NCLC think it's really important to not delay. So we are interested in your client stories. We're interested in hearing what's happening. You, especially as trusted advocates, as housing counselors, really are key in this because you do see folks and you see them when they need help. So love to hear what you all are seeing as this goes. And we will at NCLC keep you posted. I know NHRC will as well. And we're hoping that this goes pretty quickly and promptly. And that's sort of where we are now with this. It's a really tenuous time. So I'm going to stop here. Ellie or anyone, are there any questions about VA or anything you'd like to add on this?
The only thing I'll say is you kind of answered this, but somebody wanted to know what's the best way to identify the investor.
Oh, great question. The best way to identify the investor really depends. I'll do this is a quick version. For Fannie and Freddie, you go onto their loan lookup tools. You just Google Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, or Fannie Mae loan lookup, Freddie Mac loan lookup. You have to get your client's permission to get because you have to use their last 4 digits. You have to get your client's permission to use that. If you go through those lookup tools, it will pop up generally whether it is a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac loan. FHA and VA are relatively easy. Usually there's quite a few things in the closing documents to say if it is an FHA loan. They probably will be paying MIP or mortgage insurance premium to FHA. And VA also on the closing documents, it's usually in pretty big, bold print, whether it's a VA guaranteed loan. And also veteran borrowers generally know if they have a VA guaranteed loan. If it is a USDA direct loan, boy, that's the easiest. You're paying the United States. That is the one program where the government actually lends money to folks. And then USDA guaranteed. So this is the Rural Housing Service arm of the United States Department of Agriculture. That's usually the hardest one to determine. There can be some documents attached to loan writers or others that will tell you. Often, if you're working on it with a client and it looks feels like an FHA or VA, you may ask the servicer if it's a USDA guaranteed loan. If they say it is a farm loan and your client is not living on a farm, that is a good tell. So those are the main investor types. If it's not those and it's private, again, it's just harder to know what rules apply for those. That is my short version of very important topic of how to determine the investor status. Any other questions, Ellie?
Yeah. Quickly, do you know the kind of percentage that will be in the VA partial claim?
What a great question. So my understanding is we are looking at a max partial. The max partial claim is in the bill specifically. I don't remember it off the top of my head. It does differ for each for a few categories. So if it's a disaster or if it is a COVID hardship, but it is stated like it is in other programs. So an FHA is 30% of the unpaid principal balance cap. That is the most partial claim you can get. I'm blanking on the particular percentages on the bill, though you can look it up there. The bigger issue, and I'm not sure how the agency is going to implement it, has to do with how many times the borrower can access the partial claim. That is different than FHA, which doesn't have exactly those types. So we're going to see how those details shake out. But the other thing to say is a lot of these details about the program are going to have to be worked out in the implementation phase. So you will get the punchline here is we will probably have to do some more guidance and another webinar on the actual program rules, but we're going to need to see how that is implemented first.
Okay, and then just 2 quick questions I'm going to read out. Could VAS still be available for defaults that started after 5/1/25? And aren't servicers required to tell you who the investor is if you ask?
So you should ask the servicer, but uh, you should also do this look yourself. I do think, and there's a whole notice of error process, which I think is really important to do that. That is through RESPA and RFI. But I do think you should also early kind of first look. Like that's really my advice here is one of the very first things you want to do with the borrower in front of you is go through that process to figure out who the loan investor is. But then you should do further things like ask the servicer or follow up. So you should do that. And that, no, after 5/1, my understanding is there will be no VASP availability for defaults after May 1st, 2025. And if you are in this bucket before, first thing I would do is suggest you read that circular, because the circular provides some details on those folks who are prior to May 1st, 2025, trying to come into the system. So read the circular, but you'll see pretty clearly that the program has been canceled effective 5/1/2025.
And then just one last thing I want to say, and I'm going to hand it back to you. Thank you,
Sure.
April Jones, who put into the chat the links to look up Fannie and Freddie
Oh, wonderful.
Mortgages.
There you go. Even easier. Have them bookmarked. Thank you for that. Okay. So that's VA. Important little detour, but important as a detour because you definitely will be seeing these folks, and just want to make sure that you're following what's happening because this is changing very quickly. Okay, let's move into the stated topic, which is FHA. So again, now we're talking about loans that are FHA insured. I think this slide is the most important one. It's a little complicated. We are about 2.5 months away from a shift from the COVID waterfall. Again, the menu of items that the servicer looks at, the terms, or the menu of options servicer looks at for a borrower in default. We are shifting from the COVID waterfall into what we've been calling the permanent waterfall. I'm calling it the Mortgagee Letter 2025-12 waterfall. That shift is about to happen. So the key thing here, the COVID waterfall of options is the one to use through September 30th. This is not limited to COVID hardships. This is the waterfall for almost all hardship borrowers with hardships. That change happened years ago where the non-COVID waterfall was suspended and everything was gone through the COVID waterfall of options. So that is what we have been using for FHA loans for a while now. On October 1st, the waterfall outlined in Mortgagee Letter 2025-12 will become effective. For those of you who are new to this, FHA makes policies through mortgagee letters. Those are letters sent to the servicing industry by the investor FHA saying, "Dear servicers, this is what you use to evaluate borrowers who are in default." So we had a Mortgagee Letter 2025-12 that sets out the new waterfall. As a side note, that mortgagee letter will eventually be put into the FHA handbook for single family loans. There's a handbook 4000.1. Periodically, the handbook will take updates and will just integrate the mortgagee letters into the policy, and that becomes the policy. I'm referring to this as the Mortgagee Letter 2025-12 waterfall, because that's a single place you can go to see what has changed. So that's how we're referring to it. We're also call it the permanent waterfall. That is the biggest takeaway. September 30th, COVID waterfall goes through. On October 1st, the permanent waterfall takes over. Successors and interest, those borrowers who were not, or sorry, they're not borrowers, those folks who became had an interest in the property, succeeded in interest in the property, but aren't the original borrower on the loan. They are the one class of folks who have been using FHA HAMP. So they have not been using the COVID waterfall. They're going to use FHA HAMP again through September 30th, but then on October 1st, they are going to be using the Mortgagee Letter 2025 waterfall. And that is going to be where we do for successors and interest. There will be some particular provisions for successors and interest. Some of them we will talk about. This is the big deal here. This is the effective date. This is what you need to know. The other thing that I will say importantly is, boy, things can change. So I hope that this is the policies that we have, but of course things can change, and you'll see how they change here in a bit. So that's just a challenge, of course, that we have to deal with. That is where we are right now. But of course, part of the benefit of being connected with NHRC is being notified if anything changes. But we're going to go with this policy for now, and if something changes, we'll let you know. Okay. I'm going to walk through how this happened, because some of you might be thinking, I thought that deadline was different. Well, those people, you all aren't wrong about it. Here's what happened. So at the end of the previous administration, very end of the previous administration, we had another mortgagee letter. And that put out the permanent waterfall according to the previous administration. And this included the payment supplement, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. That announcement said the COVID options were good through February 1st. And then the permanent options are effective February 2nd. So you might be thinking, that may be thinking what you have in the deadline. However, the new administration made some changes. So that's really the key here. So we have this mortgagee letter, and the mortgagee letter changed the effective dates. I wanted to set this all out because you have probably heard February before, and now I'm here to tell you it has moved up to September. So worth walking through. So if you thought February was the date, you're not crazy. It's just it changed in April with the new administration. That's really the key. So there are some other changes to the permanent waterfall. If you were really following it, and you were following what the permanent waterfall looked before and after, there are some changes with the new administration of the permanent waterfall. Probably the biggest message that we got was about the payment supplement program, and we're going to talk about that. What you'll see in the mortgagee letter is the new administration is going to conduct an overall evaluation of the payment supplement tool. So we're going to talk about the payment supplement, but just to know, this could be a place for future change. I think, and we at NCLC think, the payment supplement is extremely important. So we want to talk about that, and I think it's really important for you all to share success stories. But before we get into what the payment supplement is, well, first I want to do one thing, and then we're going to talk payment supplement. Just as a reminder, the waterfall now has it is for most hardships, only successors use FHA HAMP, good through September 30, 2025. It also allows for streamlined low doc or no doc loss mitigation. So really removed unnecessary barriers for loss mitigation. So that's the COVID waterfall. And as many of you have probably known, it involves basically a standalone partial claim option, which helps borrowers who can afford their pre-hardship payments. So a partial claim that just brings the loan current through a partial claim load through HUD. We'll talk about that in a little more depth here in a bit. But so it has a standalone partial claim, a modification for payment relief if they need actual payment relief and not just a return of their payment. And then because rates have been so rotten, or at least higher than the market, we have payment supplement. So these are, and we're going to talk about that in depth. So these are the waterfall components. This is in the pre-COVID or the pre-hardship, sorry, the pre-transition waterfall. Let me now stop and see if there are any questions about this. Ellie, anything on the, while we're here? And I'm going to quickly let my dog out because he is, but I'm going to stay on AirPods. So 1 second. And Ellie, are there any questions?
Let's see. Not specifically. Not specifically.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Sorry about that.
I will just answer one question. Somebody asked about the links that aren't included in the presentation being sent. And yes, when we do the email out to everybody that with the recording, the PowerPoint will be in there and all the links that we've put into the chat. And then we'll include any links that other folks put into the chat as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Ellie. So again, main number one takeaway, erase this February transition from your mind. We are now thinking about a September transition, so end of September transition from the waterfall, from the COVID waterfall to the permanent waterfall. Okay. So I think it's now important to talk about payment supplement because for two reasons. One, as you can see in the mortgagee letter, it was specifically kind of brought up as something they are evaluating. But more importantly, it remains a really crucial option for people in a high interest rate environment. Let me walk you through that a little bit. For FHA loans, modifications change the rate to the market interest rate of that is happening right now. They're supposed to, we have modifications as this tool to provide payment relief. But unfortunately, because modifications are tied to the market interest rate, and that market interest rate is very high, what we've seen are loan modifications actually lead to increases in payments, because if a borrower has like a 3% interest rate and the market rate is 7%, you don't have to be a math wizard to understand that that's going to have the tendency to make the payment go up, not down. And so what we were struggling with, and this has been happening for 2 years, I know many of you on this call are aware of this issue. And so what's been happening was HUD was seeing that, and they developed a program in the payment supplement to allow for payment reductions in high interest rate environments. And again, we're only talking here about FHA loans. So it was a tool that is trying to get payment relief in high rate environment. As many of you know, many borrowers do need that tool because of how because of what recovery from a financial hardship looks like. Many people need relief. So they had the payment supplement, but it is really new and novel, and it came into effect January 1st. And I don't know that a lot of folks have seen it yet, but it is really important. It is built on partial claims. So, and I've said partial claim a few times already. Let me break down again what a partial claim is. For FHA, what that means is converting either arrears or interest-bearing loan amounts to 0% interest amounts payable at the end of the loan. It's called a partial claim because FHA is an insures loans, and when they go into default, they have an obligation to pay an insurance claim, and this is a partial claim on that insurance to help resolve the borrower who fell behind. And so the borrower, when they have a partial claim, and this is payment supplement or standalone, then has a loan to their servicer at an interest rate, and then a 0% interest rate loan to HUD to cover the arrears or whatever else is needed to bring the payment pursuant to the waterfall, and they pay that at the end of the loan. It is a really important tool because that 0% interest without having to make payments is really a good way to drive affordability. So that is what a partial claim is. Again, it's connected to how the loan operates. And the payment is made to the servicer, but the borrower creates a new loan payment with HUD. And then, and that's how this works. And it can be very confusing for borrowers, of course, because they have to sign new documents, and then it just becomes overwhelming sometimes. And that's why housing counselors are so critical to help borrowers understand what these things are that they are signing. So that's where you all play. So play an important role. So that's what the partial claim is. So the borrower still owes the money on a partial claim, but they do not make monthly payments, and they have these two separate loans. Okay. And where the partial claim sort of started was in that standalone situation. That's where it historically was, which is taking amounts owed and just putting them at the end at 0% interest, and then having a new loan to HUD. But what is interesting is that partial claims can do more. And the next step was to combine them with loan modifications to help drive payments down. That was another way we've seen partial claim used. But of course, we are in this rate environment where modifications don't make a lot of sense. So now we bring in payment supplement. And it is used for both covering arrears and reducing the borrower's monthly payment. We're going to talk about that in a second, but first I want to see if there are any questions just about the structure of partial claims, because I know that can be tricky for people to wrap their minds around.
Well, there's kind of within that some questions around payment supplements. So
okay, well, we can just jump ahead to payment supplements then.
Well, let me. Okay, all right.
Oh no, you can, or if you think that there are any partial some things to cover first before we get into the payment supplement, let's do that.
All right. So this one is, just to be clear, it is best for the foreclosure client to get the COVID partial claim before the new partial claim, as the COVID applies to all hardships.
Oh no, that's so we're going to get to that. Just a little bit of, that's a great question. A little bit of advanced preview here. The new waterfall is not that much different, but there are some important differences that we're going to walk through. But the terms of the options, as you will see, are not that different. But it's first important to dive into the payment supplement because, as I was showing, there is a concern that it may not be around, that there's some questions at HUD of whether it's going to stick. So good question, but you'll see in a bit how not that much is going to change.
Okay, and then so a borrower is currently in a forbearance until December. When the forbearance is over, is their workout solution based on new rules effective October 1? or rules in place when they entered into forbearance. I am most concerned about the 2 years in between workout rule. Many of my clients have had numerous workouts post-COVID and may not have any options due to the 2-year rule.
Ooh, that's a great question. So I would say in a situation like that, where you've got someone who's going into forbearance, but you've got some time, I think you're going to need to look pretty detailed into all of those questions. And I think it's going to be a deeper dive into how the handbook is particularly written. And maybe something that we want to talk about, because that is an interesting, complicated question, and it kind of does get at the tension here. So thank goodness they have a housing counselor to help them figure this out, because it's probably the particulars of the situation are going to matter a whole bunch in that one. But so good question, and it might require a little bit of a deeper dive.
And then just one last question, not for you, Steve. I just want to answer, somebody's asking about if the slides will be emailed. So when we send out the email with the recording and all the links, one of the links will be a link to the slides. We cannot email the slides directly. They won't go through email. There's too much, they're too heavy with data, so they won't make it through email. There we go. Take it away again,
Great.
Steve.
Okay. So we've covered partial. So very good questions. So we've covered that transition date. One of the questions kind of showed that it can be tricky to figure this out, and particular client situations are going to matter. But again, want to focus on the payment supplement here now, because this getting in, they'll just skip to the punchline here because it's important. Given the statement about evaluating the payment supplement, if you think payment supplement is the tool that's going to make this work for your client, I think getting on top of that would be important, and then sharing out why it is good. So this is why we're going to start here, because it is in the waterfall now and can provide big time relief. So the main key thing to understand about the payment supplement is it does not involve modification of loan terms. It does not change the rate or the term remaining. That is really important, because it's modifications that probably for many people will increase interest rates because they increase to the market. If you understand one thing about the payment supplement, it's that there's not a modification, so it does not involve an increase in the interest rate. Instead, what it does to provide payment relief is it takes extra partial claim. So you have partial claim, again, that loan from HUD. It allows borrowers to access extra partial claim beyond what is needed to just bring the loan current, and it supplements payments for a 3-year period. So what that does is makes the borrower's payment obligation lower. They will be incurring more partial claim, but that is at 0% interest due at the end of the loan. Now, as counselors, you have to remind them there is money due at the end of the loan. So if they try to sell it or transfer it, they have to address the partial claim. But the idea here is we use extra partial claim to make the payment affordable. Now, it's only going to be for a 3-year period, so they're going to have to figure out how to get to their pre-hardship payment at the end of that. But for 3 years, it is going to provide extra partial claim to supplement the payment and bring the borrower's obligation lower while not increasing the interest rate. That is the key. And it is going to aim at, not necessarily hit, a 25% reduction in the payment. So crucially, borrowers have to have partial claim available to use this. And so we talked a bit about this in the VA section, but it's worth bringing up here. borrowers don't have an infinite amount of partial claim to access. Of course not. You can't convert the entire loan to 0% interest. They are limited by statute to 30% of their unpaid principal balance at the time of the first default. And it goes down to there. But that is the cap. There's a 30% cap. So many people will have maxed out their available partial claim because of previous loss mitigation. So that is going to cause an issue potentially. And so borrowers will need enough partial claim at least to cover the arrears. And then there are rules about how to calculate payment supplements for borrowers who don't have full capacity. You at least got to get a minimum relief in order to access it. Those rules are complicated. We're not going to dive into those. The main thing to understand is you have to have partial claim availability enough to bring the loan current, and then enough to provide at least a minimum level of payment relief. That is the key here. Many of your folks may have maxed out partial claims, and I'm sorry, this program isn't going to help those folks. And they will have maxed it out from previous relief programs. So what this does is just to be clear, it will through partial claim for borrowers who have enough partial claim, it will reinstate the loan. By doing that, it will leave the rate unchanged. That's the most important part. The term is unchanged, and in fact is advanced because of partial claim. And then it will reduce the borrower's monthly payment obligation by taking extra partial claim and applying it to the portion of the borrower's monthly payment. This is powerful because of that rate issue. And many of your borrowers need payment relief. So that is why I am walking through this, because I think for many, many folks who need relief, this is important. And I don't think a lot of people have accessed it yet. And I think we need to make sure as counselors, as advocates, that they are seeing this program when it is there, because it is really valuable. And just to flash forward, it is part of the permanent waterfall. It's in there. But we did see this note from HUD saying they are evaluating it. So I would say, if this is something that your client needs, I would act now. And the other thing I would do is make sure people understand what success means here, that this payment supplement is really helping people. I think that is a crucial thing that we can do right now, is help policymakers and everyone understand that these programs are important and they are providing important relief. And that if it wasn't for this partial claim, they might have a modification that just wasn't going to provide payment relief. So this is why we're spending some time here. I think we've talked about this before, but just going through it again is really crucial, because it's there now. It is in the permanent waterfall, but we are concerned whether it may not be there for long. So, so that's where we are at now. I'm going to just go off camera quick to grab my dog. I want to see if there are other questions. Ellie, is there anything in there that we should cover?
There's lots of questions.
I thought that might be. Yep.
Yeah. But the first thing I want to say to everybody is, please, if you put questions into the chat, we're going to lose track of them. So please don't put your questions in the chat. Please put them in the Q&A box. The chat box is constantly scrolling, and there's people having conversations, which we want to encourage. But your questions should be in the Q&A box, because we will lose track of them if they are in the chat. Okay. So why would a lender/servicer deny a mortgage holder the FHA payment supplement program if the mortgage holder has an FHA loan?
Well, that's a good question and important. So it is all pursuant to the waterfall. Okay. So Um, Payment supplement is at the bottom of the waterfall, meaning the servicer is going to evaluate the other options first. And so it's possible that the servicer has identified that the standalone, based on conversations with the client, that the standalone partial claim is more appropriate. There are situations in which modifications do provide payment relief, so it might be that. And so there are those potential issues. That's one bucket. The second bucket is if the partial claim has all been used up, it's not going to be a payment supplement, right? Again, partial claim is capped at 30% of the unpaid principal balance of the loan at the time of first default, meaning there is a finite amount of partial claim a borrower can access. So if the borrower does not have enough to bring the loan current and then supplement it, they're not going to get the payment supplement. So one is there is an option before that it's more appropriate. Two is there is an option, the option's just not available. And three is the servicer messed up. And so part of your job is to understand these rules, because number three is a common situation. So I'd say that's it. Got to make sure this is only for FHA here. This is a innovative program that we have seen the USDA have a pilot on, but for the most part, the other investors are not using this program or have not developed this type of program. So it is all very new for servicers. So there can be some time and some challenge issues for servicers picking it up. But you know, there's still those three buckets, and number three is one that we all have to look at.
And thank you for clarifying that this is just FHA, because there's a few questions about this. Can Fannie and Freddie use this also? And the answer is no. Let's see, where was the other one? Our payment supplement's only for FHA loans, and the answer is yes. So
there's a little caveat to that. There's a
okay.
quick caveat. So USDA Guaranteed has put out a payment supplement pilot program. It is not mandatory, and I'm not sure how many servicers have picked it up. But so if you have a USDA Guaranteed loan, you can try to ask for it. I'm not sure what the current status of that is, but the servicer does not have to offer it. So it is mandatory in FHA, not for the others. But one thing about Fannie and Freddie, I'll just note, Fannie and Freddie allows borrowers to keep their rates, even if those rates are lower than the market interest rate. Why there's a difference there has to do with securitization, and I'm not going to get into it, but it's just noting that we don't see the same amount of issues in Fannie and Freddie loans because of that. It was really FHA where this interest rate problem was causing big issue. And of course, the VA has been its own separate nightmare.
So that's very interesting that you said that about Fannie and Freddie and the interest rate, because somebody did ask if it's possible for a policy change that allows a borrower to maintain their current interest rate in a modification. And I've asked that question before, and I know it's a securitization issue, which I'm not even going to bother trying to explain.
Yeah, it has to do with how FHA, VA, and USDA loans are pooled, and they are pooled in different securities than Fannie and Freddie are pooled, and it has to do with balance sheets. And hopefully Fannie and Freddie maintain those policies, but it's tough. And I should also say, you know, if you've got like litigation issues, meaning the servicer has screwed up, you know, you're working with a lawyer who's bringing a case, the rules are different. There's no rules. Then you're trying to like settle a case. This is really about like what you get just based on the investor status of the particular loan. And so when we're not talking about servicer mess ups, we're just talking about the actual structure. Then the rate change has to do with how these loans are securitized. But I don't need to dive in more than that, but I think that might be the one level up that could be helpful.
Okay, and does the borrower have to pay back for the payment supplement, extra partial claim, or do they have to pay additional insurance? And then one other question, do they have to be 90 days behind to be eligible?
I always forget about the 90-day behind. I think I don't. You have to look at the rules. I can, when in I don't have committed to memory imminent default, so you have to bear with me on. You have to look at the policy one for that, or the policy for that, and it would be in the handbook and then in the mortgagee letter for future. Um, on the paying back of extra partial claim, what happens is that those supplemented amounts add on to the partial claim, which then has to be resolved at the end of the loan. So what that means is the amount due on the partial claim is going to be larger than it would otherwise. But of course, the trade-off is if the borrower needs the relief, then 0% interest loan due down the line is better than losing your home because you couldn't make payments. So the partial claim part grows. And, I do think that is challenging for borrowers and why you all play such a crucial role. It is hard for borrowers to have this, what is a balloon, I mean, it is due at the end, come due. So part of it is helping them understand that, if you didn't have that, it would make the offer worse. And then for them to really get no, if I'm going to sell this property or refinance, I have to remember to deal with this partial claim. The worst thing is you sell the house, forget about the partial claim, your borrower gets the proceeds, but then HUD and everyone comes back at your borrower to collect that money, and they will. So it's crucial for them to understand, this is, we're doing this because of these reasons, but I have to remember this money is still owed on the house and it needs to be addressed. And, often that is through a refinance or a sale. Sometimes it gets to the actual end, but just they need to be aware of it. And that is why borrowers, as you all know, fare way better when they have trusted housing counselor, legal services lawyer to help them understand it, because that's going to make them more likely to get it. It's also going to make them more likely to understand, oh, in 3 years, my payment is going to go back to what the pre-hardship payment was. So another thing that's really crucial for you all to do and why it's important to understand it is, what's the plan here to, in 3 years, resume payments? Is it going to be saving money? Is it just going to be thinking about job? Whatever it is, you all will help them become more successful at the end of that partial claim period. Sorry, the payment supplement period, by doing that planning. So that's why what you all do is important, and that. But this is new; it's hard to understand, and it really does have a role for housing counselors and legal services or other advocates to help folks with.
So there's a couple of people who are asking for a restatement of exactly how about a partial claim and how much somebody can get and whether they're eligible.
So 30% of the loan, unpaid principal balance of the loan. And then when you first get it, so it's 30%. So you multiply 0.3 by whatever the balance was. The most important, and I'm glad this question was asked, because the thing you all need to help folks remember is whether they had one before. That's really the key. For the most part, if you've got a borrower who comes in and they haven't really had a partial claim, probably the partial claim max is going to help them get something, right? 30% is quite a bit. If they're super, super behind, maybe it's a problem. But for the most part, it's not so much the people who are coming in on their first default. The people who we need to follow up on is those who have had defaults before and they are coming back. Often they have used partial claim, and that is where it gets tricky. And often they haven't had a housing counselor help them the first time. And so they don't remember how much it is. This is so I think part of it is like you do need to ask for FHA loan, like, have you had a partial claim? But then do not stop the thinking at, oh, they said no, so they haven't had one. It's possible that they've forgotten it. So how do you tell? This has become a real challenge, I think, and I think a lot of you know that. I actually have a slide coming up for the future waterfall that might actually provide some helpful guidance that we could try to use. There is calling the National Servicing Center. There certainly is asking the servicer if there are foreclosure involved or some documents. I think getting documents and seeing if there have been a previous partial claim. I think like the more you can plan and sort of get information on, the better you're going to be when this comes up. Because 30% of the unpaid principal balance is, again, like a pretty big amount, but it is those people who have fallen behind before. So just asking and then verifying is the key.
So I do want to point out that a couple of people said some helpful things in the
Great.
chat. Partial claims are recorded to the borrower's deed, so you can look that up to determine if they received prior claims. And then somebody said, yes, don't rely on the client to remember. Many of mine have not.
No, they have not. And the other problem is, I really like the point about recording. The other problem, though, is that servicers are sometimes screwing up and not recording. So how I would look at it is like, if you can see the record and it looks pretty clean, like that's good. But if you see something in the file or in the documents that suggests, ooh, maybe they did have a partial claim, I would pull on that thread a little bit, because there's definitely the possibility the servicer didn't record it. Now they should have, because this is a second loan on the property, right? This is a subordinate mortgage that HUD is requiring to be attached. So it should be recorded. But the world is not perfect, as we well know. And so I really like that suggestion. And that's a pretty good gauge. But boy, you still have to, if you see something that suggests otherwise, you may want to pull that thread a little bit as well.
So just one hack that somebody put in for confirming the partial claim, modification, etc., have a quote unquote lender position call with the borrower and review these items for confirmation.
Great. Yeah, why not? I think however, these are great suggestions. Put them in, because people, this is really just what people have used to identify it. And again, because what you don't want, here's what you're really trying to do. What you want to avoid is, your client says there's no partial claim. You're like, boy, there shouldn't be there's not a partial claim. This is a slam dunk payment supplement or a standalone partial claim. It would work for that as well. And you put a bunch of time in, and then you get all the way to the end and you're like, oh, there's a previous partial claim, and it's kind of thrown all of your advice out. So, you want to do your diligence on an FHA loan to do your best to see if you can figure out a previous partial claim. Because what you're really trying to do is avoid, you spending all the time going down a particular hole that is closed off because, they maxed out their partial claim and none of this is actually available. So.
And then one last question before we move on. So the payment supplement is available right now.
It is available right now. It became effective. It became mandatorily effective January 1, 2025. From May of 2024 to January 1, servicers could use it. I didn't hear a whole lot of servicers using it, but now it is mandatory effective. And I think now my gut is that there was a bunch of loans that people probably used some partial claim on, so we weren't really seeing payment supplements a lot because maybe they had maxed out their partial claim. But I do think now, as we are moving even farther from the pandemic, I would hope that payment supplement really is the tool that folks are going to use because, again, for people who need payment relief, the likelihood that a loan modification is going to give them that relief is pretty low given where rates are. So that's why I think this is so important is we know people need relief to be successful very often. And so this should be there for them. And I do think not only using it, but sharing what works is really important here. And we have a bunch of details, and I'm happy to talk through payment supplement calculations. They can be tricky. It can be tricky. This is a real high level of what a payment supplement is. The actual math is can be tricky. I think we've done some talking about that this year. If not, I'm also happy to walk through a payment supplement calculation with you because it is at the end, so you have to compare it to others, and it's not necessarily easy, but really it's important to understand it at a high level so you know how to advocate for your clients. Okay. Anything else on this, Ellie, or should we move forward?
The one other thing I'll say is somebody did ask about how come I don't know about these programs? How come I'm just finding out about it right now? I'm going to post into the chat a link to the website where you can find all of the HUD FHA mortgagee letters, and that's where all of this stuff gets put out. And you do have to do some reading. They aren't always the easiest to understand, which is why we often bring Steve on to help us understand. But I will put that link into the chat so that you can see, and you can sign up for to subscribe to emails from FHA, and then this stuff, you get it right into your email box. Right. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay. So now we've done payment supplement, we've done the waterfall. Now here's what's coming. And here is the link to the waterfall. To the mortgagee letter that includes the new waterfall, the revised order. So this goes into effect October 1st, 2025. Back to the previous question, like when you have an edge case, you have to sort of look exactly, but it's just important. Let's just kind of make this a little easier. Just October 1st, this new waterfall comes into effect. And again, what's going to happen with these mortgagee letters, like Ellie said, HUD sends these out, and then periodically HUD will update its handbook, its big handbook, to incorporate these mortgagee letters. But they make the changes through the mortgagee letters. So if there's another change, it's usually going to happen through another letter, and we will keep people updated on whether other letters are here. So the first thing is right now, the future waterfall retains the payment supplement. It is still in the waterfall. It is still at the end. But again, there is that evaluate language. So just that is the warning. Unfortunately, and for us at NCLC, the new administration's new waterfall deletes the language access provisions that were in the previous administration version of the post-COVID waterfall. Those are gone, and we're not going to cover those. It's just, we advocated for those at NCLC. They're no longer in place. Okay, so what is new about the waterfall? So I think the main bit of news that I want to share is that the new waterfall still allows for a streamlined loss mitigation process. I was a legal services lawyer before coming to NCLC. I worked during the financial crisis of 2008. Many of you on this call did as well. We know just how rotten the document chase process can be. People, for those of us who are doing that, submitting documents, resubmitting documents, resubmitting documents, all of that stuff was a pain. The COVID waterfall options did not require documentation. That was new for at that time. What I consider to be good news is that the new the waterfall coming in, the permanent waterfall, does not reimpose burdensome documentation requirements. In fact, it says, so I'm going to do a lot of quotes. I'm kind of pulling important quotes from the mortgagee letter. Here it says, the borrower is not required to provide financial documentation to be evaluated for a loss mitigation option. So, honestly, there's a good reason for this. The programs are no longer for FHA based on a percentage of income. You shouldn't have to collect a whole bunch of financial documentation to review the options. So it is very good, I think, that FHA is not requiring borrowers to submit a bunch of stuff. That is an important, good bit of procedural news. Now, the borrower will have to complete a loss mitigation request. There will be, and what that means is, as you can see from the second bullet, letting the servicer know what the hardship reason is, talking about the occupancy status, and there are some documentation requirements for successors in interest. And remember, that one was treated with FHA HAMP, which was very burdensome. Now, we're within the whole waterfall. There aren't two separate waterfalls, but there may be some documents required for successors in interest. There may also be some additional documentation to confirm hardships, some types. Not a whole lot of them, but there are some. So there is a chart in Mortgagee Letter 2025-12 that gives you when you do need to document some hardships. But the big punchline here is that we don't have the requirement to provide financial pay stubs, bank statements, all that stuff. We wouldn't really fit into the evaluation, and it's good that they're not part of the requirement. So that's one important point. And I know we've had questions about that before. So there's one important change, or important, not a change, actually, confirmation of policy that was in place before. So what else? The borrower will have to do an attestation, just as a heads up, meaning the borrower is going to have to affirm that they can make a payment. This is the language from the mortgagee letter. Now, the servicer is going to have the ability to do that verbally. I suspect some servicers may want it in writing. So just be aware, this is a new concept, and just as you're working through your practices and policies, just the borrower will have this requirement now, and you should, and I don't know what all is going to be in the attestation, because they may be verbal, but we do have that. So the borrower is going to have to attest to whether they can make the payment. Here's the big change. This one is probably the most relevant change to on the loss mitigation side from the previous waterfall to the current. So we are now back to where we were prior to the pandemic, or pretty close, which is the borrower can now only receive one loss mitigation option over a 24-month period. Now, and I believe it starts for when the first is paid. Now, this goes to a question now. A borrower who received a PDMDA is disaster or a COVID home retention option in the past 24 months remains eligible for a permanent home retention option. So there is some, so clearly disasters are excluded, and there is some give for the COVID options as well. Um, it's going to be interesting how servicers read this language. And again, this is new, so we haven't seen this work out yet. But I would say if you have borrowers who are in this bucket, it's a good to read the language particularly and to really hold up the options they've had before with this language. If you need help with that, this is another thing that I would be interested in helping you puzzle out. So this is a big change from the COVID waterfall. The COVID waterfall did not have this requirement. It was sort of envisioned, I think, as a temporary pause, like a temp. We knew something was going to come in to have a limit, and this is what it ended up being, because we knew the COVID policy of not having these limitations wasn't going to be permanent. So this is one to just think about how this is going to affect your clients. And if you need some help sort of thinking through this, let me know. I'd be happy to kind of look at this with you, because this is a big shift, and it could impact folks. So loss mitigation limits is a big change. But again, it's not terribly surprising. This was pretty close to what we had prior to the pandemic. It's worded differently, but functionally it's pretty close. Okay. The other thing that is back are trial plans. So trial plan pay, for those of you, if you were doing this before the pandemic, you certainly know what a trial plan is. Maybe some of you haven't been doing it, but now we are back to having 3-month trial plan payments. That means when the borrower is offered an option, they have to show that they can afford it. So we're now going to have trial plan payments for permanent loss mitigation options. And we are going to have 6-month trial plans for successors in interest. And why successors were treated under FHA HAMP and why we need it for 6 months. There's a lot of kind of policy debates about this, but for your purposes, it's just important to know that we're going to have trial plan payments again. Borrower's going to have to complete them. There's guidance on what those rules are. Don't be surprised to see a 6-month trial plan payment if you have a successor in interest. That's just a thing that is coming down the pipe here. Prior to this, the current policy is FHA HAMP, which requires documentation and all of that. So I think this is probably a little easier to just do the 6-month trial plan rather than have to go through the FHA HAMP process. I guess I don't know. Those are both added burden beyond what standard borrowers are. But this is just another thing that is coming back, our trial plans. We have a definition of hardship as an increase in living expenses or loss of income affecting the borrower's ability to continue their mortgage payments as attested by the borrower. I think it's helpful to at least know now that we have kind of a very specific definition of financial hardship. I think more or less this language was kind of either in there or generally part of it, but now I think it's a little more straightforwardly defined. And then also, what's interesting, mortgagee must consider owner-occupant borrowers and non-occupant borrowers for all loss mitigation options. So I think that's a little bit of an opening up of options for non-occupant borrowers, which can come up depending on circumstances. And we do have, I did not paste it in here, but if you look at Mortgagee Letter 2025, I would direct you to look at what I think is a pretty helpful chart about how the servicer will move toward these options. So again, You know, back to kind of one of the previous questions, it's not just simply you call up and say, get me to the payment supplement. That's not how it really works. Instead, you walk through the waterfall, which is the options and how the decisions are made. And I think the chart in Mortgagee Letter 2025-12 is pretty helpful. So I would recommend one, if you open that, just go right to the chart. I think it will help you understand how these all fit together. So let's pause there for a second. Those are some pretty important procedural issues. Ellie, are there any questions about any of those?
Oh, Steve, there's so many questions.
Great. Well, let's see. Let's hear them.
Okay. All right, let's see. There's some more questions coming in about the payment supplement and partial claim. Let me look at a couple of those.
Okay.
Are there any
And we can
statistics?
do some of those at the end, but go ahead.
All right. Are there any statistics on the number of payment supplements that have been approved?
Ooh, we have to. I think that's going to be something to dig up. We're still in a bit of a lag place because it's still only been in place mandatorily for 6 months. So that's going to be something that folks like me and others are going to be looking at. So I don't have any off the top of my head, but also it is going. We're still pretty close to the beginning of the program.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts about options for seniors on a fixed income unable to afford the loan modification offer?
It's really hard. These are really hard cases. So, you want to for folks who do want to look at payment supplement, but I understand the fixed income thing is going to be a problem because in 3 years it's going to go up. I think really evaluating absent like big litigation claims, the waterfall kind of provides there's not like a lot of ability to get even deeper payment relief. So I think for folks, it's really about sitting down and thinking about not only what the option is. First off, making sure they got, you want to make sure that they get the best offer that is possible under the waterfall. I think that's one. Let's say you do that. I think really sitting with folks and comparing what their options are relative to the rental market, relative to other situations, and then having hard conversations with folks about the home versus other places. I think this is where when I hear a question like that, it makes me think that person should talk to a housing counselor about what, or a legal services advocate about what's really possible. And what you can do is make sure by working with them that you're getting, the option that is really what they should get under the waterfall. And then it's about comparing what their other options are, and especially thinking about the rental market and often having hard conversations about home affordability. So it's a good question. Thankfully, there's people like you who can help them.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of a chat going on around
Great.
is if reverse mortgage is a way to resolve this problem, and that it depends. And so
glad to hear that going on in the chat. It's a very challenging
yes.
situation.
Okay, let's see. Are servicers required to offer the payment supplement if the borrower is eligible to receive it?
Yeah, I mean, if an FHA borrower, they have to go through the waterfall. So the servicer is going to proceed through the waterfall, either the the COVID option or the one coming up. Payment supplement is in both. So, the key is whether the borrower can afford the payment. If they can't, then they should be evaluated for first the loan modification option and then the payment supplement. So, yes, they're required to do it, but they don't. It isn't like I said, you just call up and say, give me the payment supplement. They do have to go through the waterfall. But if they're an FHA servicer, they should be offering the payment supplement. If the waterfall hits payment supplement, that's what they should be offering.
And somebody's asked, speaking of waterfall and partial claim and payment supplement, somebody's asking, where does that where does the modification fall along with the partial claim combo in the waterfall?
So in the previous, or sorry, in the current, sorry, I'm going ahead of myself. In the current COVID waterfall, after the standalone partial claim, you look at the modification option and and that can be comboed with the partial claim. And you see if that can provide payment relief before you move to the payment supplement. So really, the modification is ahead of the payment supplement in the waterfall. And if you look ahead of the payment supplement in the future upcoming permanent waterfall.
And I think you talked about this earlier, but I will mention it again. Are all lenders aware of these options per the payment supplement, or do we, the housing counselors, advise or ask the lenders or servicers about it?
So great question. Sure, those servicers know. The question, of course, is you're dealing with a person on the other side of the phone, and you don't know if they're up to date on if a payment supplement. Now, their computer system might be, but I do think there is advocating and making sure that the person who you're talking to is following the policies that they should be following. And so that's why you want to arm yourself, because I don't need to tell you all that there are plenty of times where, sure, the people at the top know about the payment supplement and they are trying to train the people who are working for them, but it doesn't always happen. So that's part of what you do, is making sure that they're looking where they should be looking. All right, we should move forward. It is
Okay.
20 minutes, and I want to cover some of some of this. So this is the chart is, so I talked about the chart here. I just said with the chart is really the good place to look. This is just the simple version of the order in which things are considered. So you have repayment plan, forbearance first, not surprised there. And then you get into partial claim, loan modification, combo loan modification, partial claim, and payment supplement. So again, not a whole lot of difference here. But there are some changes that I want to dive into. Check out repayment plans. There's been some changes on repayment plan section and on forbearance policy. Both of those are interesting. Don't want to get a lot of detail there, but do think especially if you're starting to see more repayment plans, or and then making sure your clients get forbearance, I do think like there's some stuff in there, but I do want to breeze through that because there's some other things on the home retention options to cover. So first, which is good, the standalone partial claim, that just taking a partial claim to bring the loan current, put it at the end of the loan, and resume the current payment, that remains at the top of the waterfall. That's where people, and again, you do have to have partial claim availability, but presuming you do, that remains on top of the waterfall. Now, borrowers should be told here, as you can see, there are payment reduction options potentially available, because what we don't want are borrowers thinking the waterfall is one step and just taking a payment, a partial claim, and not even thinking about reduction options. Want to make sure people are at least aware. So we're glad to see this in. So the standalone is at the top. There is something different, though, in the upcoming waterfall, and that is the servicer has to look at whether a modification, a simple loan modification, could also allow the borrower to resume payment. It's sort of this extra evaluation step here. So this is a situation in which the borrower is talking to the servicer, and the borrower says, yes, I can resume the payment. And let's assume that borrower has partial claim availability. So under the COVID waterfall that's in place now, this would be pretty easy. The borrower would just get a standalone partial claim. Now on the upcoming waterfall, the Mortgagee Letter 2025-12 waterfall, the servicer has to take one more step. And the servicer has to look at whether they could just do the same thing, get to the current payment with a simple loan modification. And if meaning you just at the rate, market rate, and a simple term extension. And if they can do that, they have to offer that instead of the standalone loan modification. So that's just a little extra complication when a borrower says, I can afford to resume my pre-hardship payment. Now, if rates stay up, this is probably unlikely to matter because you're not going to get that type of even payment from a simple loan modification. So this is worth it's complicated. It adds a complication, and it's worth understanding that unlike the COVID waterfall, the servicer has to do a little extra work when the borrower says, I can afford my payment or the pre-hardship payment. So just be aware, even if your borrower's in that spot and you think there's a standalone partial claim coming, it is possible that a modification will come instead. Now this is interesting. So this is new guidance, and I want people to just think here for a second. One thing that we have had trouble with all over is getting the servicer to verify the borrower's previous partial claims. So this is some language coming in that the servicer, mortgagee, must verify if the borrowers had previously received partial claim. And they actually tell you, or the servicer at least, what they're supposed to verify this through. Now, this language is coming into effect in October 1. I have not seen this before, and I think it could be useful as a tool to say to the servicer, when you're in that situation where you're not sure, it's like, well, couldn't you verify through, and I'd say it like the smart integrated portal. I'm curious if you ask the servicer to do this, if that's going to be a way to verify through the servicer whether there's been previous partial claims. Again, this is new language to me. I don't know how this would work, but I saw this and thought this could be useful as a tool to get previous partial claim information, which is something that we all want. So just a heads up on that. Okay. So that's what happens when the borrower says they can afford their current payment or the pre-hardship payment. Now, if the borrower instead says they need payment relief, now we move into a modification evaluation. Again, we're not doing the standalone partial claim because that would just bring the borrower current and have their pre-hardship payment. But if the borrower says, no, I need payment relief, this is what the servicer is supposed to order. Now, they target a 25% reduction in principal and interest payment. Now, many of you heard me say this. I'm going to say it again. Target means target. Does not mean you will get a 25% reduction in payment. You might not get much at all. But the target is just where the servicer is aiming at. And whether they can hit that target depends on previous partial claims, interest rate, all that stuff. So the target is just that, a target. And what you do is you walk through these modification options to see if that target is hit. So you start, and this is like high level detail, but we don't have time to like go through each of these, but you start at just a term extension to 30 years and market rate modification. That doesn't do it. You then go to a 40-year. And then if that doesn't do it, you do a 30-year, but add some partial claim to take some of the interest-bearing principal. If that doesn't do it, you move to a 40-year combo with partial claim. So again, what you're trying to do is hit that 25% target. And the waterfall is saying you take these particular steps one at a time to see if any of those modifications will result in a 25% reduction in principal and interest. That is what the options are in order. And so, that all of that is going to depend on how much partial claim is available and what the rate is. So what happens if you get to the bottom? So if you get to the bottom, you then see, if you've gotten all the way to the 40-year, what you see is if there is a 15% reduction in payment or more. So here you haven't hit the target, but before you move to that last step, which is payment supplement, you see, well, is the modification good enough? I mean, that's really what this is. Is the modification good enough? And if the modification is good enough, which means not quite 25%, but better than 15, that should be the offer. If it's not 15, then the borrower is reviewed for the payment supplement. So to scope back here, what do we have? We have a borrower who says, I can afford my current pre-hardship payment. They are in this standalone partial claim world where they can be considered for a mod, but it's mostly standalone partial claim right now. If the borrower says, no, I need payment relief, the target is 25%, and the servicer first trudges through these modification offers or options. If it is got all the way to the bottom and it's good enough but not quite, they'll get the modification offer. If it is not good enough, then you move to the payment supplement review. And at the end, the borrower, if you get to all the way to the payment supplement and you're at the end and you still haven't hit 25%, then the servicer figures which of the two options is better, payment supplement or the 40-year combination mod. All of that is a lot of math. We don't have time to cover it, but that's the idea of the waterfall. You're walking through these particular options. You see if the target is there. If you can't achieve the target through either, then the servicer should offer which one is better between the payment supplement and the combo mod, while the hopefully the payment supplement stays in place. And also, you have to meet all those other eligibility requirements, specifically the 1 in 24 years. So that is the main thing. There is also this outside the waterfall loan modification. This is where the borrower has been unresponsive and they just send them an offer. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because your borrowers are going to be responsive, and we'll walk through the waterfall. Just as a heads up, there is an outside the waterfall loan modification. These are the rules for it. I think we want to get to questions instead. I'm going to hang the slides on the waterfall here while we ask them, and we have 9 minutes left. That is a whole lot of detail. Ellie, what do we have for questions?
Oh, so many. Okay.
I figured. That's why I wanted to leave the time, because I knew that.
Yeah.
I
There's
didn't
a
want
bunch
to
of
spend
people.
time on the outside the waterfall modification because you folks are all going to be responsive with your borrowers. So let's talk about your questions with the waterfall itself.
Well, there are a few questions about the owl. So
Okay.
can you just talk a little bit about what it might look like?
So
That's kind of what people are asking
for,
like an example.
So this is going to be let me just scope back. This is going to be folks who aren't responding to their servicer. And what the servicer is going to do is look at the financials of it and simply, could they get a modification that either through a 30-year or 40-year term that they can just send out to the borrower in the hopes that the borrower is going to respond and take it. So this is not doing this conversation that we've been talking about. This is just sending out an offer. And so the key here with the OWL is it has to have at least a $1 reduction to the principal and interest payment in the borrower's monthly mortgage payment. So you can see kind of right away that it's probably not as good as walking through the waterfall. So this is just the servicer hasn't been the borrower hasn't been responsive to the servicer, and so the servicer is just sending this out because they can get a $1 or better reduction just with a simple modification. So the reason I didn't spend more time on it is that's not you walking through the waterfall with your borrower. This is just the borrower isn't responding and the servicer can send this out.
Okay. All right. Is payment supplement an option for someone who is current but wants a lower payment or needs a lower payment?
So I this is again, I never remember these imminent default. So we are now talking about a borrower in imminent default. It, it, um, there's a lot of changes in this. I tried to get the highlight. There are some changes in imminent default. I would say if you have a borrower in that circumstance, you should really go to Mortgagee 2025-12. You can control F imminent default, and there's it's a new sections on what is required for imminent default. I cannot remember if the payment supplement is one of those options, but there are some guidance on imminent default in the new letter.
And I put the link to that into the
Great.
chat. We put it in a few times, but just to make it easier for people. Okay. After the 3-year period, are payments going back to the original amount?
Yes, the payments should go back. So because what you've had is you brought the loan current through the one part of the partial claim, and then you have supplemented the payment for 3 years. And so then that supplement is going to end. And so what will result is the borrower's pre-hardship payment, and the payments will advance. This is payment supplement we're talking about. So then at the end of that 3 year, it'll go back to the borrower's payment. Now, of course, taxes and insurance can change. We know that. We're only talking here about principal and interest. But the principal and interest portion should go back to where it was. So I hope that that's something borrowers can wrap their minds around, that we're returning back to a payment. I would hope that would make communication a little easier with them to say, it's like not some other payment amount, but we'll have to see. And that's why you all play such a crucial role. So yes, return after 3 years, and definitely help them talk through how to plan for that.
So one of the attendees did very helpfully put in the section about the imminent default
Great.
definition for people who are looking for that. Okay.
Very good.
And a lot of people have said it, and I think that this is probably a good plan, Steve, for us to think about this, but to have another session because there's a lot of information here.
Let's be very clear. First, you have to understand structurally what's happening here. I think the takeaways from this are we have a waterfall change. It is going to impact particular areas, and a lot of what's in the new waterfall is very, very similar to what's in the old. There are even more details to understand how these things are calculated. We first got to build the big structure of it, and then either we train also you kind of have to go through, like, now what does it mean within all of those boxes when you have a particular client. The new mortgagee letter is 250 some odd pages long, so it does take more than one go.
Well, and what I'm thinking is that maybe we have another session after the mortgagee letter is in effect, and we can start to see how it's working. And I'm sure NCLC will be keeping very close track of it. And there are a lot of questions, and we only have 3 minutes, so I don't want to keep people, including you, Steve, past 3 o'clock. So what I'm going to do is save these questions. I'll get them over to Steve. He's always really good about answering questions that don't get answered in the webinars that he does, and will get them out to everybody. And I want to also remind everybody that NHR, because there was a question about, since we can't really get, get a lot of response from CFPB right now, what is a good thing to do? I will say we do still have the escalations list. We don't have every servicer, but we have a lot of the big ones. So if you email me at epepper@hsgcenter.org, I will give you the link and the super secret password, because it is only accessible to HUD certified housing counselors or people in HUD approved organizations. So with that, thank you, Steve, and thank you everybody for all your great
I want to
questions.
say thank you to everyone. This is complicated. Imagine being a borrower without your help. You all are doing really important work, and let me know how I can thank you. Sorry, I had to thank you all for that because there's a lot to go through, and I really appreciate everyone.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much. And we'll be in touch about the next one. Okay. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bruce to wrap us up and close us out.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. So the text for the THUD